Sean Diddy Combs.
Sean Diddy Combs.
Sean Diddy Combs.
Prosecutors say Combs led a criminal organization that they call the Combs Enterprise.
What happens when a superstar's world crumbles? Watch as Diddy goes from the spotlight to the brutal truth of prison life, secrets, struggles, and shocking moments. This is the story you've never heard. Get ready for a wild ride. You won't believe what happened behind those walls. From unexpected betrayals to shocking revelations, the truth will leave you speechless. Fame couldn't save him. Now he faces his darkest reality. The arrival. The day Diddy went to jail felt strange, like time stopped for a moment. Everyone knew about him, the famous guy with flashy clothes, fancy cars, and a lively personality. Now, he was just like any other prisoner, wearing the same dull outfit. The air in the building felt heavy, and whispers moved through the halls like tiny mice scurrying around. The guards did not act as if they were impressed by him. They didn't care much because they had seen many celebrities come and go. One of them just waved for him to follow, and he moved slowly, as if his legs were made of stone. He looked defeated, with his head down and shoulders slumped. It was hard to believe this was the same person who used to walk the red carpet with a big smile. The atmosphere in the holding center was dreary. The fluorescent lights hummed like angry bees, and the walls were a light gray with some areas peeling. Everything smelled damp and musty, like wet socks left in a corner for too long. The sound of footsteps echoed sharply through the halls, breaking the quiet. Other prisoners looked on, showing a mix of curiosity and lack of concern. Some of the prisoners watched Diddy closely, like they were looking at a new animal in a zoo, with narrowed eyes as he walked by. Others whispered behind their hands, nudging one another as though to say, "Can you believe it's really him?" But Diddy seemed different from what they expected. He didn't look around. He looked down with a blank face, as if he was trying to disappear. His clothes didn't fit well. The outfit was loose on him, making him look smaller than he really was because of his dull color. It was quite different from the fancy clothes and sharp suits that people usually saw. His shoes were plain and worn, not like the shiny ones he showed off. He looked normal. The oddest part was that too. The guards led him down a long hallway. The farther he walked, the quieter it seemed to get. The prisoner stopped talking quietly, and the buzzing of the lights got louder. Diddy's steps were slow and heavy, as if he was carrying the weight of his past. His cell was nothing special when they arrived. A small square room with a metal bed fixed to the floor, a thin mattress that doesn't provide much comfort, and a tiny sink that dripped slowly, one drop at a time. The walls were bare, with only some scratches and marks made by previous prisoners. The air smelled stale, not as fresh as it used to be years ago. Diddy came in without saying a word. He closed the door and the sound echoed in the hallway. He stood there for a moment, looking at the empty space around him. His shoulders drooped more, and he slowly sat on the bed, looking completely drained of energy. Even though they went back to their normal routines, the other prisoners always remembered he was there with them. Sometimes people would walk by his cell and look inside, curious to see the man who lived a life they could only dream of. Diddy did not react. He sat on the edge of his bed with his hands in his lap, looking at the floor, and his face looked tired and older, with wrinkles missing from previous years. He used to be bright and confident, but now his eyes look dull, as if his inner spark has faded. This is not the same Diddy that people know from music videos or magazine covers. He was just another guy in a place that didn't care about who you used to be. The day Diddy arrived was just the start. The real challenge began as he faced the tough prison life ahead. Prison reality. Life inside the detention center was harsh, with no room for comfort or kindness. The walls were rough, the paint chipped away like old memories trying to disappear. The cells were small, barely enough space to stretch out fully. Each one felt like a box trapping its occupant, stealing their freedom and shrinking their world. The air was thick with the smell of sweat, dampness, and something stale, like a place that hadn't been cleaned properly in years. The sounds of the prison were constant and unrelenting. Metal doors clanged open and shut. Guards barked orders and footsteps echoed down the narrow hallways. Even when it was quiet, there was a heavy hum in the air, a reminder that this place never truly rested. For the inmates, it was like being stuck in a world where time didn't move forward. It just lingered, slow and unforgiving. Daily routines were rigid and unchanging, designed to strip away individuality and freedom. Mornings began early with bright lights flooding the cells and a loud, jarring buzzer that could shake anyone from sleep. Inmates shuffled out for roll call, their faces blank, their movements mechanical. Breakfast was served in a crowded cafeteria where the food was bland and lukewarm, offering no comfort or satisfaction. The rest of the day followed a strict schedule. Work assignments, cleaning duties, or hours spent in a small outdoor yard surrounded by tall fences and razor wire. There was no room for choice or creativity. Every action was monitored, every move controlled. It was a routine designed to wear people down, to crush their spirit little by little. For Diddy, this new life was a sharp contrast to everything he had known. Gone were the luxurious mansions, the private jets, and the adoring fans. Now he was just another inmate, following the same rules as everyone else. At first, he seemed out of place, his presence almost surreal, in this cold, harsh environment. But he didn't fight it, he didn't argue or complain. Instead, he accepted it with a quiet resignation, like he understood there was no way out. Adjusting to prison life wasn't easy, but Diddy didn't draw attention to himself. He kept his head down, avoided conflict, and did what was expected of him. He ate the same food, wore the same uniform, and followed the same routine as everyone else. There was no special treatment here, no reminders of his past life. The days blurred together, each one a repeat of the last. The walls of his cell became a constant presence, closing in on him like a reminder of his confinement. The mattress was thin, offering little comfort, and the small window let in just enough light to remind him of the outside world he could no longer reach. In the common areas, Diddy kept to himself. While other inmates formed groups or tried to assert their dominance, he stayed quiet, observing but not engaging. He wasn't looking to make friends or enemies. He was just trying to get through each day, one step at a time. The reality of prison life was unforgiving. The lack of freedom, the constant noise, and the oppressive atmosphere were enough to wear anyone down, but Diddy seemed to accept it as part of his punishment, a price he had to pay. He didn't show anger or sadness, just a quiet determination to endure. Even in the yard, where inmates could stretch their legs and get a small taste of fresh air, Diddy's demeanor remained the same. He walked slowly, keeping his distance from the others, his face unreadable, isolation and decline. The once vibrant man who entered the detention center began to fade, both physically and emotionally. Diddy's decline was visible to anyone who cared to notice. His body, once strong and full of energy, grew thinner with each passing week. His shoulders slumped as if carrying a weight far heavier than the prison walls around him. His face, once lively and full of expression, now looked hollow, with sunken cheeks and tired eyes that avoided contact. The food, already unappealing, seemed to hold no interest for him. He ate sparingly, just enough to keep going. But the lack of nourishment took its toll. His weight dropped rapidly, and the clothes that once fit snugly now hung loosely on his frame. He moved slower, his steps heavy and deliberate, as though every movement cost him effort. Emotionally, the spark that had once defined Diddy was extinguished. He spoke less and less, retreating into himself. While some inmates found ways to express their frustrations, angry outbursts, arguments, or alliances, Diddy chose silence. He avoided conflicts, choosing isolation over the chaotic interactions that filled the common areas. Even when others sought to provoke or challenge him, he would quietly step away, uninterested in confrontation. His cell became both his refuge and his cage. It was a space stripped of comfort, but it offered him the solitude he seemed to crave. Diddy spent hours alone, sitting on the edge of his narrow bed or leaning against the wall, staring into nothingness. The cell was small, barely enough to stretch out in, but he stayed within its confines as much as possible, limiting his exposure to the noise and chaos of the prison beyond. There was one place, however, where he found a sliver of solace: the small window in his cell. It was nothing more than a narrow rectangle positioned too high to see anything clearly. The view was obstructed by bars, and beyond that a dull patch of sky, but during certain hours of the day a thin stream of sunlight would slip through, casting a faint glow on the cold floor. Diddy gravitated toward this spot, standing silently beneath the window as the light filtered in. The sun's warmth, faint and fleeting, seemed to offer him a moment of comfort in an otherwise cold existence. He would lift his head slightly, closing his eyes as if trying to absorb the light, as though it could fill the void inside him. These moments became a ritual, a rare connection to the outside world that now felt so far away. The isolation wasn't just physical, it was deeply emotional. The noise of the prison was constant, but for Diddy, it faded into the background. His world grew smaller, reduced to the walls of his cell and the brief moments of sunlight he clung to. He no longer resembled the man who had walked in with his head held high and a quiet sense of acceptance. Instead, he became a shadow of himself, fading into the background like a forgotten figure in a crowded room. The other inmates noticed his withdrawal but left him alone. Perhaps they saw no challenge in a man who no longer fought, no threat in someone so visibly worn down. The guards, too, seemed indifferent. Diddy followed the rules, caused no trouble, and blended into the monotony of the daily routine. To them, he was just another inmate, one among many, with nothing to set him apart anymore. The days dragged on, each one blending into the next. Diddy's silence became his armor, protecting him from the harsh realities of his surroundings, but also cutting him off from any sense of connection. He was alone, even in the crowded spaces of the prison. As Diddy grew weaker, his silence became louder, drawing attention from inmates who saw his vulnerability as an easy target. Struggles with other inmates. In prison, even the simplest action or inactivity could make someone a target. Diddy's demise was caused by his silence. As soon as he got to the busy jail, everybody noticed how calm he was. His previous fame helped him avoid problems and resulted in more queries than negative responses. The prisoners were watching him from afar, speaking quietly and shoving one another as they discussed the man they had just seen on television. For a period of time, people were fascinated in jail, but that enthusiasm swiftly turned into anger. The issue was not what Diddy did, but rather what he failed to do. He ceased to be involved. He did not respond in the same manner. He did not say anything. The people who shared the small, stuffy environment with him misunderstood the stillness as arrogance. They thought that Diddy behaved as if he was superior to everyone else. Because the jail system did not let anyone to demonstrate clear control over others, his refusal to reform made him a target. The comments began in a low tone. Someone would quietly murmur, their words coming out sloppy. Diddy passed by. "Do you think you're too good to sit with us? Do you still believe that you are the best?" At first, the words appeared to be innocent. To avoid any disputes, Diddy would glance down and keep going. However, his silence only added to the rising rage. After that, there were violent conflicts. He would be pushed in the lunch queue. Someone bumped the tray, causing his meal to fall to the ground. The crowd had burst into laughing as his chair was taken away just as he was going to sit down. Diddy would try to suppress his feelings and avoid fighting back, but every time he was pushed or a plate was dropped, it wounded him even more. The others either did not realize the hardship it was causing him or did not want to admit it. Diddy would sit on his bunk with his head in his hands at night when the jail was quiet. He murmured his regrets to himself. He was unable to stop thinking about the decisions he had made that had brought him to this moment. He frequently used scraps of paper to help him arrange his thoughts by drawing on them. However, the annoyance would be too much for him to handle, and he would crumple the papers in defeat and throw them away. At times, he displayed his vulnerability. During the few moments when he was alone and no one was watching, he would sit by the window of his cell and stare blankly at the paint that was peeling off the walls. Although his face was difficult to interpret, his eyes revealed that he was upset over his history. He was constantly battling with himself, and their sentiments of remorse, irritation, and deep melancholy were evidence of that. The pandemonium made things more difficult because of the loneliness. Even when Diddy is around other people, he still feels lonely. His silence went from being a way to protect himself to becoming a cage in which he felt trapped. The more he attempted to remain unnoticed, the more visible he became to those who wished to do him harm. The breaking point. The cafeteria was one of the most chaotic places in the detention center. The clatter of trays, the hum of conversations, and the occasional bursts of laughter filled the room. It was a space where dominance was displayed and weakness was exploited. For weeks, Diddy had endured the jabs and shoves, the taunts and stares. But on this particular day, the tension that had been building finally came to a head. It started with a shove. Diddy was carrying his tray, carefully maneuvering through the crowded room when an inmate bumped into him hard. His tray tipped, the contents spilling onto the floor. A chorus of laughter erupted from nearby tables. Diddy froze, his body stiff as he stared at the mess at his feet. The group of inmates responsible didn't back down. They circled him, their voices rising as they hurled insults. "What's the matter? Superstar can't handle a little mess?" one sneered. They were testing him, waiting for a reaction. All eyes in the cafeteria turned to the unfolding scene, inmates pausing mid-bite to watch. Diddy bent down slowly to pick up the scattered food. His movements were deliberate, almost robotic, as if he were forcing himself to stay calm. The laughter grew louder, but Diddy didn't respond. He straightened, holding the empty tray in his hands, his face a mask of composure. But something was different. His usual calmness now seemed heavier, almost fragile. The room buzzed with anticipation, inmates whispering to one another, wondering if he would finally snap. Instead, Diddy turned and walked away, leaving the spilled food behind. His silence wasn't defiance, it was defeat. For Diddy, this moment marked a shift. The quiet strength he had tried to maintain was cracking under the weight of the constant hostility. His deliberate actions in the cafeteria hinted at a man struggling to keep his emotions in check. On the surface, he seemed calm, but inside, he was unraveling. The cafeteria incident was just another reminder of how far he had fallen. Once celebrated and admired, he was now reduced to picking up scraps off the floor while being mocked by those around him. His refusal to fight back wasn't a sign of courage. It was the reaction of someone whose spirit had been worn down to its last thread. Later, as he sat in his cell, the weight of the day's events seemed to press down on him. He stared at the wall, his face blank but his mind likely racing. The muttering began again, soft, almost inaudible, but the words carried the heavy burden of regret. This breaking point wasn't explosive, it wasn't a dramatic outburst, it was quiet, almost imperceptible to anyone not paying attention, but for Diddy it was a turning point, a moment that marked the beginning of a deeper descent. Thanks for watching. If you found this video interesting, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more content. Hit the bell icon to stay updated and click on the next video popping up on your screen. See you next time.